it's hard to let go of those negative cognitions of not trying to be perfect all the time, of trying to just be a human being. When I heal, I can then reach out to other people because I'm not coming from a place of hurt or of neediness. I'm coming from a place of, hey, this is my story. This is who I am. And you can either, open your heart and listen and accept, or you can say, no, thank you, not for me. And either way, it's okay because of the work that I've done. It's okay now for people to say, thanks, but no thanks. Whereas in the past, I would have taken that as a sign of there's something wrong with me.
Welcome to the Yes to You podcast, a platform for women to foster collective healing and social change by telling our stories. You'll hear from phenomenal women overcoming adversity, redefining success, and helping others along the way. We want all women to know that your dreams matter and that we can achieve all things through the power of love and sisterhood. So if you're ready to break down barriers and say yes to your calling, you are in the right place. I'm your host and the founder of RohiniWellness.com, Dominique D. Wilson. And now, let's do this.
Can you guys believe it's 2020 already? Happy New Year! I know I haven't been on here in a while, and there are some very good reasons for that, which I'm not going to take too much time going into because I have a very lengthy but awesome value-packed episode for you today. So I just want to start by saying I'm so glad to have this moment to connect with you all. The podcast is going to be undergoing yet another change. Yeah, I know. I started the podcast last year, January 2019. I began with an overall personal development and entrepreneurship tone. I then moved into some storytelling, bringing on guests, which I still intend to do. It's just that the message is going to be a little bit more around sensuality, self-care, and really stepping into our power as women. So look out because that's going to be hitting your podcast player this spring. In the meantime, I want to tell you about our guest today. Just in time for tax season, you want to make sure that you stick around and listen to the entire episode because this is going to be a real gem for you. Today's guest is an enrolled agent, tax resolution expert, and the host of Tax Tribe, the podcast. When asked if she finds taxes intimidating, she recalls, I read Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales in its original text, and after deciphering that monstrosity, taxes were a breeze. So it is my absolute joy to introduce our amazing guest for today, Wendy Uken.
Thank you so much, Dominique. I am so excited to be on your podcast, and I've actually been following you for a long time. So this is a real honor for me to get to be on your show. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy. And it's an honor to have you as well. I'm a big fan of your podcast as well. I've learned so much. And so I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Me too. I can't wait to get started.
So for our listeners who haven't met you before, can you talk a little bit about the work that you do and who you impact?
Sure. And actually, this is one of my favorite questions to get because tax resolution is such a small part of the tax industry in general that when I say tax, people immediately think, oh, you prepare taxes. And I say, well, I know how to do it in theory, but I'm not really a tax preparer. And then they go into, oh, you must be an accountant. And I say, well, I do know the fundamentals, because it's important for what I do, but not really. So what I do is called tax resolution, and I work with a very specific group of people, typically people that owe the IRS, large tax balances, and they're in hot water because they're in a, financial bind. They're having a hard time making ends meet at home, and now they have this big bad agency on their back. So when people need a little bit of help, getting that under control, that's when I work with them. So what I really do is I help people settle with the IRS and establish a binding resolution so that they don't have to be afraid for their livelihoods and they can still provide for their family while doing their civic duty.
Wow, that's definitely very impactful and something that I know so many people need. And so I truly admire that. So what inspired you to get into this line of work?
Well, actually, it was really luck of the draw because when I went to, when I was looking at colleges, I really didn't know, what route to take. I knew when I was younger, I wanted to help people. And so initially I thought about becoming an attorney. But at the time, I was undocumented. So, I wasn't eligible for like federal grants or scholarships or state grants or scholarships. So I had to be really careful with what I chose. And I thought, well, if I can read and write, I can learn to do anything. So my background is actually in English literature and language, and I got my degree from UCLA. But once I got out of college, again, I didn't know what to do. But I did feel like the world was my oyster because I could really do anything. And luck of the draw, I saw an ad on Craigslist for tax resolution. And I thought, these seem like my kind of people because the ad said you're going to be working with people that are, stressed and anxious and afraid. And I thought, wow, I can really empathize with those feelings. I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning and you can't, there's nothing you can do to save yourself. So I don't know. I guess that drew me to it because I felt like, well, maybe I can't help in any other way, but I can learn to do this really well so that I can provide hope for people. So, even though tax resolution wasn't even on my radar when I was growing up or going to school, I felt really lucky to sort of happen into the industry through Craigslist, out of all places.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting how that happens because you never know how your calling is going to pop up. It could be through Craigslist or someone on the street. So I'm so glad you said that because you were able to identify something that was a huge shift, I'm sure, for you in such maybe what some people would consider kind of a mundane place, but it turned out to be something that impacts a lot of people. So I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's one of those things. I don't know. I go back and forth on destiny. Sometimes I feel like, wow, things are destined to happen. And sometimes I feel like, wow, you have to make destiny happen because you're seizing the opportunity. And I felt like with this, it was a little bit of both, sort of like it was meant to happen. And, I took the opportunity and I embraced it so that it could become part of my destiny.
Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced along the way, along your journey? I know you mentioned a little bit about the struggles of being undocumented and kind of having to overcome some of those limitations that are imposed on you by society. Can you speak a little bit to that for people who are going through that or maybe have family members that are in that situation?
Sure. Well, one of the biggest things that I struggled with was being authentic and, connecting with people. Because when I was growing up, not only did I have being undocumented as part of my background, when you're undocumented, you don't want to tell people a lot of things. You don't want to get them to know you because what if they find out and, they reject you? And honestly, that's happened to me in the past. I've disclosed to, people that I thought were my friends that I was undocumented, and they told me like, oh, I'm sorry, like I think you're a nice person, but I can't be your friend anymore. And you know what? I completely understand that because everybody has their own sets of, their own moral compass that they use to guide their lives. So I don't begrudge them that, but it does make it difficult to make connections and to ask for help when you're in that situation. And I would say that even translated into my work because when I got into the industry, it was more like, I was a clerk. I was doing a lot of data entry, a lot of collecting information. But to me, it didn't seem like a real career path. It was just something to do while I moved on to the next thing. And it wasn't until my mentor took me under his wing and, he pretty much told me, look, you have a gift for this. I really feel that if you become an enrolled agent, you could do a lot of good for the world. Well, I took his advice. But when I mentioned that it's hard to be authentic and connect with people, he very early on, disclosed to me that he was not particularly open to working with undocumented people, and that, he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder about that. So it was hard even having a mentor that I really admired and I really, wanted to get to know more when, they know that, or when they don't know that there's this huge part of yourself that you're hiding simply because, it's something out of your control, something that you can't really do anything about. And so that made it extra difficult because as I was climbing the corporate ladder, I don't know, people felt like they really didn't know me. And there was a really good reason for that because I didn't let people get to know me. So climbing the corporate ladder was difficult. Office politics was difficult. And I feel like the biggest struggle is connecting with people and letting people in. And to anybody struggling, out there with this, I would say, for me, it's taken a lot of therapy, but taking small steps to get to know people and letting them in, even if they reject you, it's still a good thing because it gets you used to talking about it and asking for help and saying, hey, I have these particular skills that I can bring to the table, but I need help in these other ways. And more often than not, people will help you and they will support you. And at the very least, they will let you go on your way unharmed, which I think for somebody that, maybe has really strong, opposing points of view, I think the fact that, in the past people haven't, reported me or anything once they've told me I can't be your friend anymore, I think that says a lot about humanity, that we don't want to hurt each other. So if there's anyone out there that's maybe afraid to let people in, I would say, do it because people are kind and gentle and they will try their best to understand you, even if they don't know how.
Gosh, I totally agree with you. And I love how you said, people don't want to hurt one another. You spoke to the humanity that we have. However, there is this fear that sometimes gets in the way of that communication. So I want to know, in your opinion, why do some individuals have such a fear around exploring a relationship with an undocumented person?
Well, I believe it has a lot to do with not just upbringing, but the rhetoric that we put out in society. Right now the rhetoric is terrible. We're rapists and murderers and here to, take over like, I don't know, a disease. And the reality is that we're just people. So when somebody tells you, I'm undocumented, they're not going to immediately assume, you're going to talk to somebody like me, somebody that speaks English very well, somebody that's been, formally trained, who has, a degree from one of the biggest universities in the country. You're going to think, oh, these people are here to like rape and plunder, because that's what you've been hearing. The other thing is, people just don't know and they go based off what they already know. And let me give you an example. When I had just been accepted to UCLA, one of my siblings had been accepted to Cal Berkeley, which is another, amazing institution. And my brother at the time, he was in middle school. So I was very proudly, and at the time I was working in a restaurant as a hostess, and, you have to engage with people. And I was very proudly telling, this customer, like, oh my gosh, I got accepted to UCLA. My other sibling got accepted to Cal Berkeley. And, now it's just my brother. And the gentleman said, oh, what happened to him? Is he in jail? And I was like, yeah, I was like, no, he's 12. Why would he be in jail? So I don't think it's that people really maybe feel that way in their heart. They're just afraid of what they don't know. And I can't remember, who said this quote, but it's one of my favorite. when it says, when people let go of their hate, all that left is pain. And I feel that people that have hate in their heart have a lot of pain. And so it's easier for them to hold on to that hate than to open their hearts, feel the pain for what other people are going through, and empathize, because feeling can be hard and it can be overwhelming. And when you don't know how to deal with those types of emotions, it's easier just to keep people out and push them out and keep them in a category that would, that doesn't allow you to empathize and feel for them. So I think that's the reason why people are afraid to get to know other people in these types of situations.
So what was the turning point for you? Because I know you said that for obvious reasons, there was a lot of time where you were very resistant about letting people in to get to know you because of all those painful experiences of being rejected in the past. You mentioned that you've done some therapy. What are some of the ways that you were able to turn that around so that you could step more fully into your authenticity?
Well, one of the works that I really had to do, that I really had to dig into, was negative cognitions. So because of everything that I'd heard in society, and again, when you're in a position where you're afraid, you're not going to speak up. You're not going to say, hey, that's not true. You're not going to be like, oh, that doesn't really apply to me. You just kind of absorb it, because if you do, say something, you feel like your head's going to be cut off. And not only are you going to be deported, but your family's going to be deported. And, at the time when I was growing up until I was in my early teens, I had a brother that was really sickly. And I would say that 98% of his life was spent in the hospital. So not only was it, I can't say anything because my family will be deported, but it's, I can't say anything because my family will be deported and my sickly, sibling will be left all alone in America with nobody to love or care for him in a hospital. And so, when you're in that situation, like I was, you don't, speak up. You don't tell people, hey, I'm hurting and I need help, because there's all of these fears of the consequences that, could happen. And so all of those negative messagings that society had, I internalized them. Whenever I heard something, that was disparaging to my community, I would say, well, I'm not like that, so that doesn't apply to me, and move on. And because of that, I internalized, a lot of the negative stereotypes, and I really believed it about myself. So that was a first big hurdle I had to get through to understand that I'm not a bad person. I didn't do this to hurt people. This wasn't a malicious thing on my end. It just happened to be a circumstance of my life. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're indoctrinated with a specific mindset, especially because the way that I grew up, it was, very competitive, go to school, get A's, achieve. It's hard to let go of those negative cognitions of not trying to be perfect all the time, of trying to just be a human being. So the biggest work in my therapy has been learning to let go of those cognitions. They don't define me. I'm not those negative, distortions that people put out there. And then not only that, but accept the fact that, that hurt me internally, and for me to heal. And when I heal, I can then reach out to other people, because I'm not coming from a place of hurt or of neediness. I'm coming from a place of, hey, this is my story. This is who I am. And you can either, open your heart and listen and accept, or you can say, no, thank you, not for me. And either way, it's okay, because of the work that I've done. It's okay now for people to say, thanks, but no thanks. Whereas in the past, I would have taken that as a sign of there's something wrong with me, like to the core.
Wow, that is powerful, and I don't think it's small at all. I truly believe that mindset is everything, and regardless of what you're going through, whatever's going on in your mindset is going to filter all of those experiences and perceptions that you have. And to be honest, even if someone hasn't gone through the exact same experience that you've shared here, I think this can be applied to anyone who's struggling with negative cognitions and the distortions that are kind of placed upon us that we end up believing about ourselves.
Sure. And, it's not just the undocumented community that suffers from this. It's the, people of color. We have a lot of young men, growing up that, they see these negative distortions of themselves on TV. And, of course, people don't highlight, the doctors and lawyers and attorneys and, the everyday hero who, goes to work every day and provides for their family and really tries their best. So they're also growing up with these mentalities that are not healthy for them. And like you said, it's all about mindset. Once you learn that you control your mind, and when you get that, fortitude to really learn who you are and how things affect you, you're better able to defend yourself against all of that. And I don't mean, in a violent way, but maybe when somebody says something to you, you can take it, sort of, analyze it, dissect it, and then decide, yeah, this applies to me. Or, that person was totally wrong. This doesn't apply to me. And then you can put it away and move forward in triumph.
I am so loving everything you're sharing, so empowering. I want to switch gears now, Wendy, and talk about the work you're currently doing. Specifically, what's been the highlight of your journey working with clients in tax resolution?
Oh my goodness. The highlight is always getting that thank you, and because of the work that I do, there's, different options that people have. They can try to settle, they can try to go on a payment plan, they can go non-collectible status. And, really what I enjoy about what I do is being able to educate people. First, where did you go wrong? How did this happen? Because it's kind of like going to the doctor. Before they can treat you, they need to figure out, why is this happening? Where is the source of, what's causing you the problem? So once I identify that, I go through it with them and I tell them, okay, these are the steps that you need to take to ensure this doesn't continue to happen. And so that's sometimes a little painful because, that means changing your withholdings, and that might mean less money at the end of the day for you on a day-to-day basis, but it does mean that you won't owe. Or, it means making estimated tax payments if you're self-employed or an entrepreneur or a side hustler. And then it's, training yourself how to do that so that moving forward, again, you don't get a huge balance that you can't pay off. And then after the educational portion of it is done, then I can go in and, sort of repair what's been damaged. And again, that's going through one of the programs, either offering compromise, non-collectible status, or a payment arrangement if they can afford it. And then even, once you get to that part and you explain to them, hey, these are your options. How would you like to move forward? You're empowering them. And I really take that seriously because, again, when you're in a vulnerable place where you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm drowning here and my hands and my feet are tied and I just cannot, I don't know how I'm going to survive this. Empowering people with knowledge and giving them the opportunity to tell you how this is how this can best help them. That does wonders for their psyche. So just to see their mental, shift where they go from this is happening to me to no, this isn't happening to you. It's a circumstance, but here is what you need to do to ensure that it doesn't happen. These people suddenly become, courageous and confident. And then they ask for more information and they want to be further educated. So it's beautiful to see, taking somebody like how I felt, like I was weak and shy and hurt and I didn't know how to move forward, into somebody that, is now confident and courageous and can, communicate with you without, being so reactionary. Because believe it or not, we get a lot of reactionary people in my line of work. And again, I get it. They're stressed, they're anxious. So just to see that, shift in people's personality, where once they're done working with me, they feel empowered, like they know how they can handle this, how they can, take control of their finances rather than being a victim to the finance.
Wendy, that is such a beautiful testimony. I don't know about everyone else, but for me, when I think of a tax professional and how that relationship goes, the first thing that comes to mind is usually finances, but I never really thought about all the stories right behind that of what people are going through. And I think it is so cool that you are out there empowering people, not just in the area of finances, but as individuals. It is clear to me here that you definitely have a gift for being able to see the best in people and motivate and encourage and inspire them to reach higher so that they can come to a place where they're at peace. So I just want to quickly acknowledge you for that.
It's so funny because I was talking to one of my clients yesterday, and just as we were about to get off the phone, he said, "Man, I feel like I need to send you 125 for this therapy session," and I just I just cracked up. I was like, "No, it's okay. We're just two people, trying to figure it out." And yeah, like you said, it brings joy to my heart, and that's actually one of the reasons that I really enjoy your podcast, because the way that you present the information, it's like, hey, here are the tools you can use. And I'm going to give a special shout out to your episode about drinking water. So thank you for that one.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the shout out. I'm so glad that the information was helpful to you. So can you talk a little bit about your podcast? I know that you got launched just recently here, but you are off to a running start. I think that your episodes are jam-packed with helpful information. What made you decide to start the podcast?
Well, initially, I started the podcast as a way to do like lead generating for what I do. But after doing that for a little bit, I realized, this isn't serving my community as best as it can. And for me, my community is anybody who will listen, anybody who has an interest in taxes, anybody really who has an interest in anything, and they just kind of pick up my podcast. And so what I really want for the podcast is I want to educate people and I want to empower people the same way that I do when I work with them. And the reason why I picked, newbie side hustlers and budding entrepreneurs is because I realized that this is the largest segment of the population that, has so much potential. Like your earning potential is through the roof if you're an entrepreneur or, a side hustler, because you're getting to determine how much money you make. But that also means that you need to have the tools to manage those finances. Before you get to the 3 comma club, you need to figure out, how do I take care of my taxes? That way, Uncle Sam doesn't come. Because let me tell you, Uncle Sam can be ruthless. And it's no coincidence that, the majority of the audits are not done on, the wealthier, higher tiers. Why? Because they can afford to hire people like me. They can, and not just people like me, but they have like rooms and buildings full of accountants and tax lawyers and, all of these people that can dance circles around the IRS. Well, people like you and me, we don't have access to that type of support. So I felt like knowledge is power. These are the same set of tax codes that they have to abide by, that I have to abide by. If I know the life hacks and I can teach somebody, and again, this is not for them to become tax pros and, sort of switch careers. This is for them to become empowered with knowledge, at least the basics. That way, when you talk to your accountant, when you talk to your tax professional, you have an idea of the deductions that you want to explore, of the exemptions that you might qualify for, of, the upcoming episode is going to be about business trips, about how to maximize, the business aspect of it so that you can write off as much as possible and keep more money in your pocket. So that's why, the focus has changed from lead generator to, no, this is just for you. This is a positive force in the world that, I want it to have an impact in our communities because, we're known to be hustlers and to do things that will make us a little bit of extra money. And it's like, that's great. Go do it. But now make sure that, once you start making that money, that you don't suddenly have all of these, tax issues to deal with because you're prepared.
Wendy, this is exciting. As I said, I myself am enjoying listening to your podcast and learning so much. And when we come back from the break, I definitely want to talk a little bit more about your journey with podcasting.
Are you enjoying the show so far? Just imagine how much more I could do for women if only I had the support of a team. That's why I'm asking you to become a patron of the Yes to You podcast by visiting yes2upodcast.com/give. Patreon is a membership website that enables artists and creators like myself to get paid for the work we do so that we can be of even greater service to others. With the help of your contributions, I'll be able to hire a production team of amazing women who can help me to expand the vision of this show far beyond the listening experience to include live events, as well as increased collaborative opportunities between women. I know that we can create a better world by celebrating the beauty in diverse perspectives and being willing to speak up on behalf of those who still struggle to be seen and heard. I am on fire and will keep doing everything within my power to spread this message and to support that vision no matter what. That's my commitment to you. So if you like what I'm doing here and feel called to help me grow this movement, then please go over to yes2upodcast.com/give and become a patron today. And in exchange for your investment, I'm offering some pretty cool incentives. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show.
So Wendy, we've been talking about the Tax Tribe podcast and your journey so far. And what I want to know is, how has podcasting changed you?
Podcasting has been the lifeline that I didn't know I needed. People have these epiphanies and, these great reasons why their life suddenly turned around. For me, that was podcasting. It made it so that I could share my voice and my experience and, my authentic self. But it allowed me to do it in a very, sort of private and anonymous way because, you can hear me. And right now I can hear you. But generally, when you're listening to a podcast, you're taking it in, you're absorbing it and analyzing it as it goes through. So for me, it was a really gentle way of letting people know who I am and, figuring out who Wendy Uken is. For example, I know that I like reading and writing, but with podcasting, and I'm sure Dominique, there's a lot more that goes into it. You have to research, you have to come up with the questions, you have to edit, you have to make sure that the podcast is flowing. And so I'm really getting to explore, do I like editing? Do I like researching? Do I like doing graphics for my social media? So for me, podcasting is a beautiful and gentle way to sort of re-enter into the world and get to know people. And again, let people get to know me and also find out who I am along the process.
I totally agree. I also kind of started the Yes to You podcast as a bit of a lead generator, but I noticed along the journey, it started to help me get a better sense, like you said, of who I am. I'm still kind of finding my voice. I've done some different things with the podcast, now bringing people on to talk more about their stories. And so it's just very interesting how putting yourself out there takes you on a journey, and you don't really know where that's going to go until you get started. So I'm so glad that you shared that.
Right. And, that's not to say that I don't want to make money off of it eventually, but I do want to make money off of it, but in different ways. I want to do things like you're doing that serve the community. Like I know that you have courses for people, that they can take and better themselves. Well, I want to come up with something like that too. I, don't have the idea set in stone. So I don't want to move forward with a half-baked idea. But like you, I want to make sure that I'm offering people a good value of whatever it is that I'm going to offer for me to feel like, okay, this is a blessing, from me to you. And now you're going to reciprocate that blessing from you to me. So that way it doesn't feel inauthentic. It doesn't feel forced, but it's a gift that I'm giving and a gift that I'm receiving.
Absolutely. And I think podcasting is a great way to start that process, because from this content that you're creating, you'll get a much better sense of how to later package those ideas. So I think that amazing things can come out of this journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, Wendy, that you mentioned a little bit earlier that you had a mentor. Can you talk a little bit about what has been beneficial and impactful for you in terms of your personal development? Are there other mentors you had? Are there books that you've read that you would recommend?
To be honest, my reading list keeps growing, but I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. So it's not growing in the, bettering yourself, the self-help category. Because for that, I really rely on, podcasts like yours and other people's. Because for me, if I'm going to learn something on how to better myself, I want to hear it from a real person who's gone through it and who can tell you like, hey, these are the pitfalls and this is what you should look out for, but this is what you can expect. But in terms of reading, again, I love sci-fi. One of my favorites is Octavia Butler. She does a lot of science fiction that makes you think in terms of, again, people's humanity. How would you react in that situation? And she sets it always in the backdrop of, humans versus whatever else it may be. She has this incredible book about humans versus vampires, humans versus aliens, humans versus, biological agents. And it's never like us against them, but it's always like, okay, what are the commonalities here? How can we, either bridge what is not connecting very well, or how do we work around those obstacles that maybe don't allow us to fully, live in peace with the other. So that's why I really like that. And then Orson Scott Card is another one of my favorite authors. And I have read his Ender series back and forth several times. And the character that really I have been associating with all my life, and that's changing actually, is the character Bean. Because in the series, he's this amazing, brilliant, like military tactician, but he feels like because he was created and not really born, that he doesn't have the ability to love as other people do. And I really relate to that because, all my life I felt like I don't deserve this. And his journey is one of, catharsis. At the end of that journey, he realizes like, no, I can love and be loved just as much as anybody, even if he doesn't quite believe it. So, I don't read the typical like how to, be better or how to, do things more correctly. I read things that I can associate and then interpret and then sort of digest. And I'm a little ashamed sometimes to say that's usually science fiction, but I feel like everybody understands things differently. To me, it needs to be removed from reality so that I can feel like I'm dissecting it. To other people, it's more helpful to read, nonfiction biographies about amazing men and women. And I enjoy that genre too, but I also suffer from ADD, so I really need something to keep me engaged.
I think that's super powerful. You are the first person who has recommended a book that's not a nonfiction book. And what you said makes a lot of sense. We connect to story. And sometimes I think that story brings forth certain emotions we can identify with. So the sci-fi category, or maybe if you're into fantasy or mystery, whatever it is, I think that's a very important point. I do not read very much fiction, but I want to. I think it opens up your mind to different possibilities. And I think what you said about, human relations and understanding diverse perspectives and being more introspective. I mean, who knew all that could come out of reading sci-fi? So that's awesome, Wendy.
Thanks. I'm always a little like, oh God, don't ask me that question. It's not going to be like, it's not going to be nonfiction.
No, I'm sure you brought in some horizons. That was a very awesome answer. So you definitely got me thinking about like, man, I should change it up and read some more stuff. So can you talk a little bit about how you stay productive and stay focused in your business despite all the challenges that may arise up? What are some of the things that keep you grounded?
Well, I have this non-negotiation where I have 2 full hours of self-care a day. And for me, I actually going to give another shout out to another one of your episodes where you talked about outsourcing things that you don't need to do yourself. Like, you said, if you don't have time to go to the grocery store, get it delivered. And so I've been trying to implement that more in my life because time is the one resource that we cannot ever get back once you've spent it, like it's done. So I've been trying to do more of that, but really I, sort of demand my 2 hours a day. The first hour is just me, bicycle riding or walking or whatever I feel like doing that day, but it has to be active. And then the second hour is a walk with my dogs. And the reason why I do that, again, I have ADD, so I suffer from, having to do things or suffer from, the inability to concentrate and follow through on things that I just don't find, exciting or enjoyable. So I work typically, 3 or 4 hours in the morning, sometimes 5 if I'm really stretching it. But beyond that, like my mind just can't. It's just like, no, and it rebels. So that's when I take my first break. And then I go back once I've, sort of de-stressed and downloaded my brain and, uploaded some like happy memories. And then I go for the second half of my day. And then again, that's really draining. So I then do like my little puppy hour where I go with my dogs and I see how happy they are. And I'm not going to lie, Dominique, it sounds really zen and wonderful, but it also means like right now, as soon as we're done, like I'm going to spend a few hours doing laundry because it piles up. There's not enough time. There's not enough time. And my house, like my kitchen, it's pretty dirty. If my mom saw it, she would be so embarrassed. So there's a lot of things that kind of fall to the wayside that I feel like, and I'm going to use the word normal to sort of like generalize what I think people do. Like, I think normal people are able to keep up with like their housework and their laundry, but I don't know. I don't know that many people. So, there's a few things that I do to keep me going, but then there's a lot of stuff that I need help with that I'm trying to figure out how to outsource so that I can be better and more well-rounded.
So delegating, staying active, spending that quality time with yourself, I think that's beautiful. So I know that we're getting around to the end of our time together. I just want to ask if you have any advice that you'd like to share. Maybe what is your number one tip to women out there who are still trying to find their own path? Maybe they haven't figured out what their career is and they're kind of in that place where you once were. What's one piece of advice that you would give to them?
I would say surround yourself with other women that are doing amazing things. And that's not to say you're going to follow in their footsteps. It's to sort of encourage you and to empower you. And let me give you an example. When I relaunched my podcast in February, that was not a singular effort. That was not just me. It started with me going to the Women of Color Mastermind. And in that, meeting, like, it was a shock to my system. I was immediately surrounded by these powerful women, these women that knew what they wanted and they went out and achieved it, and they're fearless, and that kind of was what I didn't feel I was. I didn't feel powerful or courageous or, like a go-getter. I didn't feel like a boss babe, but here I was amongst all of these just amazing people. And again, it doesn't mean that, and I know we have like many different people in that group. Some of them, like you, you focus on how to be better internally, how to make yourself the happiest and wholest people you can. It doesn't mean that, I'm going to also try to go in that vein, because it's not, my area of expertise. But it did give me the encouragement and it did empower me to find my voice. So even if you don't know what you're doing yet, if you have really no direction in how you see your life going, surround yourself with people that do, because maybe they're not going to give you the roadmap to, your best life, but just by being around that energy, you're going to start taking steps and you're going to start coming out of your shelf and you're going to start seeing opportunities. And it's all about the people that you surround yourself with. And one of the amazing things is that you can do it, especially if you are afraid, like I was. You don't even have to reach out to people. You can just listen to their podcast, And that's actually what I did with your podcast before we connected. I just listened to your podcast and I felt like, wow, this is somebody I want to get to know. This is somebody I want to be friends with. So if you're afraid, if you're timid, if you don't know how to move forward, just surround yourself with people that are empowered and people that are courageous and people that are doing the things that they want to do, even if it means starting with, listening to their podcast.
That's beautiful, Wendy. Very well said. And I wonder if you could reach back into the past to when maybe you were 6, 7, 8 years old, what would you say to that little girl?
Oh man, that question always makes me cry a little bit. I would tell her that I know that you're going through a storm right now. And it's not a storm that maybe you feel like will ever pass. But I promise you, you will be living in your rainbow eventually. And the reason why I say that is I come from a religious family, and there's this story in the Bible where God has just destroyed the earth, with a flood. And he promises, like, I'm never going to do this again. I'm never going to destroy humanity with a flood. And his, promise is revealed through a rainbow. Now, since my religious days, I've taken that same story and applied it a little bit differently. I feel like when we're going through a rough time, it's just our storm. But if we can get through the storm, if we can weather it, no matter how crazy it may be, there will be a rainbow. There will be a time where you will be able to thrive. So, my 7-year-old self, I would tell her, like, I know it's hard. I know it's terrible. I know these feelings are just feeling overwhelming, but you will get to your rainbow.
Wow. Well, Wendy, I want to thank you so much for all that you've shared today. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about where they can reach you to find out more about you and hear your podcast?
Sure. The podcast they can find really anywhere they listen to podcasts. Just search for Tax Tribe, the podcast. And of course, they're welcome to connect with me on social. For Twitter and Instagram, it's at Tax Tribe. For Facebook, it's at Tax Tribe 1. And that's the number 1.
Awesome. Well, Wendy, again, I just want to thank you for this amazing conversation today. I don't even know if you are aware of how much you've impacted and inspired me and, of course, our listeners. You shared so much value, and I want to take a moment to just acknowledge you for a couple things. The first thing I want to acknowledge you for is your courage to listen to yourself, to follow your heart, and to just stay focused on hope and do the best you can. That speaks volumes to your character. And I also want to encourage you for to acknowledge you, rather, for your empathy. You have so much empathy and such an ability to relate to other people. And I think that is very powerful in the work you do. And it creates so much transformation because those clients who have those transformations, they go out and they're different to the people in their life. So you're just spreading these waves through sharing your gifts and, again, doing the best you can. So I just want to acknowledge you for those two things.
Thanks, Dominique. And on my end, wow, I'm just so amazed that I'm getting to speak with you right now. Every time you talk, I'm like, oh my God, this is real. It's not the podcast. She's really there. So having a little bit of a fangirl moment over here. Thank you so much again for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And I'm so honored to get to know you and be on your podcast and connect with you. So thank you so much.
Wendy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much again. I look forward to keeping in touch with you as we both continue on our journeys.
It was a pleasure to have you join me for this episode of the Yes to You podcast. If this message inspired you, then please make a donation at yestoyoupodcast.com/give. Also, subscribe to the podcast and share this episode on social media using #YesToYouPod. If you have questions, comments, or a story that needs to be told, email me at feedback@yestoyoupodcast.com. And just remember that no matter what happens, you get to choose how you show up in life. Love yourself fiercely, own your story, and say yes to your calling. Until next time, my friend, take care.